On the night of November 18, 1973, $7.3 million in unmarked bills vanished from a secure military storage facility at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. The money, earmarked for covert operations during the final days of American involvement in Southeast Asia, simply ceased to exist according to official records. No alarms were triggered. No guards reported disturbances. No security protocols were breached, at least none that investigators could identify. For 35 years, the case remained one of the most baffling unsolved thefts in military history. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations launched an exhaustive probe that consumed thousands of man-hours and produced nothing but dead ends. Federal agents interviewed hundreds of personnel. They polygraphed base commanders and janitors alike. They followed money trails that led nowhere and chased shadows across 3 continents. The investigation eventually went cold, filed away in boxes that gathered dust in government warehouses. Another mystery destined to remain unsolved. The money had evaporated into the desert air, and with it, any hope of recovering what was lost or bringing those responsible to justice. But secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. In 2008, a routine security clearance review for a retiring master sergeant at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs triggered a chain of events that would finally unravel the mystery. What investigators discovered was not the work of an organized crime syndicate or a sophisticated espionage ring, but rather the meticulous execution of a plan conceived by a man who had spent 5 years learning every vulnerability of the system he was trusted to protect. His name was Jerome Williams, and for more than 3 decades he had lived among us as a model citizen, a devoted family man, and a pillar of his community, all while hiding the truth about one extraordinary night in 1973. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jerome Williams arrived at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in the summer of 1968, a 23-year-old technical sergeant from Birmingham, Alabama, eager to prove himself in his new assignment. The base, sprawling across thousands of acres of Sonoran desert landscape on the southeastern edge of Tucson, served as a critical hub for tactical aircraft operations and, less publicly, as a way station for sensitive cargo moving through the military's vast logistics network. Williams had been assigned to the 41st Transportation Squadron, specifically to the Warehouse Operations Division, responsible for securing and tracking high-value shipments. It was unglamorous work, the kind of duty that attracted little attention from commanding officers unless something went wrong. For Williams, this anonymity was perfect. Those who worked alongside him remembered a quiet, methodical man who took his responsibilities seriously. He arrived early for his shifts, stayed late when needed, and volunteered for the least desirable assignments. He studied regulations with an intensity that his colleagues found slightly peculiar, but ultimately admirable. Within 18 months, he had become the go-to expert on the facility's security protocols, the man supervisors turned to when they needed clarification on procedure, or when new personnel required training. What nobody realized was that Williams was conducting his own private education, one that had nothing to do with career advancement. His financial troubles had begun almost immediately upon his arrival in Arizona. His wife, Patricia, had given birth to their first child just before the transfer, and the medical bills had overwhelmed their modest savings. The Air Force salary, while steady, barely covered rent on their small apartment in the neighborhood east of the base. Williams took a second job washing dishes at a truck stop on Interstate 10, working midnight shifts after completing his duties on base. He watched his wife struggle with postpartum depression while he worked 70-hour weeks, and still they fell further behind. By 1970, they owed money to hospitals, creditors, and family members who had loaned them what they could spare. Williams had grown up poor in Alabama, the son of a factory worker who had died young from industrial exposure, and he had promised himself that his own children would have better opportunities. Instead, he found himself trapped in the same cycle of debt and desperation that had consumed his father. The idea first occurred to him during a routine inventory. Check in the spring of 1969, he had been verifying shipment manifests in Warehouse 7, one of several hardened structures designed to house sensitive materials. The building, constructed of reinforced concrete with minimal windows and a single access point, was used to temporarily store currency being moved through military channels. Most of the money passed through quickly, remaining on base for no more than 48 hours before continuing to its destination. But occasionally, shipments would arrive that required longer storage, usually due to scheduling complications or security concerns at the receiving end. These shipments sat in climate-controlled vaults, protected by combination locks and monitored by a security system that was, by 1960s standards, state-of-the-art. Williams began to notice patterns. He observed that the base's security forces, while competent, operated on predictable schedules. The same teams conducted the same patrols at the same times, following routes that became familiar to anyone who paid attention. The alarm systems, installed in the early 1960s, required regular maintenance, and during these service windows, portions of the facility operated on backup protocols that were significantly less robust. He noticed that documentation procedures, while thorough on paper, suffered from human inconsistency. Serial numbers were sometimes recorded incorrectly. Counts were occasionally rushed. The officers responsible for authorizing transfers rotated frequently, and new personnel took time to learn the systems, creating windows of confusion that a knowledgeable person could potentially exploit. Most importantly, Williams realized that the warehouse operations existed in a bureaucratic gray zone. The money passing through belonged to classified programs with minimal oversight. The officers who authorized shipments rarely saw the actual currency. The personnel who handled it were rarely the same ones who tracked it. The system depended on trust and procedure, and while it worked effectively 99% of the time, that remaining 1% contained exploitable gaps. For 3 years, Williams did nothing but watch and learn. He befriended the civilian contractors who serviced the alarm systems, asking technical questions that seemed to reflect genuine curiosity about his work environment. He volunteered for inventory duties that others found tedious, using these opportunities to study the physical layout of the storage vaults. He memorized the duty rosters of security patrols and noted how staffing levels fluctuated with budget cycles and holiday schedules. He also began preparing himself physically and psychologically. He quit his second job at the truck stop, telling Patricia that he had secured a small raise on base. In reality, he needed time and energy for his own training. He practiced lock manipulation at home, purchasing older military surplus locks from pawn shops and teaching himself the mechanics of their operation. He studied the technical manuals for alarm systems, learning to identify vulnerabilities in circuit design and backup power systems. By late 1972, Williams had identified his opportunity. A particular type of shipment, arriving approximately every 8 to 10 weeks, remained on base for 3 to 5 days due to coordination requirements with its destination. These shipments typically arrived on Thursday evenings and departed Monday mornings. The money, always in unmarked bills of various denominations, was stored in a vault within Warehouse 7 that could be accessed through a combination lock known to 4 officers and himself. The vault's alarm system connected to a central monitoring station staffed around the clock. But Williams had learned that during the scheduled maintenance window on Saturday nights between midnight and 3 in the morning, the system operated on a backup generator that powered only the most critical sensors. The door alarms remained active, but the motion detectors inside the vault temporarily went offline during the power transition. This maintenance occurred monthly, scheduled by a civilian contractor who followed a predictable calendar. Williams spent months refining his plan, considering every variable, every potential complication. He would need approximately 4 hours inside the facility. He would need to ensure that the shipment he targeted contained enough money to justify the risk, but not so much that its loss would trigger immediate mobilization. He would need weather conditions that kept casual observers indoors and background noise that could mask any sounds he might make. He would need to create a plausible explanation for the money's disappearance, one that would direct suspicion away from base personnel and toward external theft or accounting error. And most critically, he would need to make the money disappear not just physically, but also from the paper trail that tracked its existence. Throughout 1973, Williams positioned himself perfectly. He continued his exemplary service record, earning commendations for his attention to detail and reliability. He became friendly with Lieutenant Colonel Richard Haynes, the officer responsible for authorizing high-security transfers, often staying late to help Haynes complete paperwork that the overworked officer found burdensome. This relationship gave Williams insights into upcoming shipments and their documentation requirements. In early November 1973, Williams learned that a particularly large shipment would arrive on November 15th, a Thursday. The manifest, which he glimpsed while assisting Haynes with routine filing, indicated currency totaling between $7 and $8 million, though the exact amount would only be verified upon final delivery. The money was destined for a classified program whose details Williams neither knew nor cared about. What mattered was that it would sit in Warehouse 7 over the weekend, and that Saturday night's maintenance window fell perfectly into place. Williams finalized his preparations with surgical precision. He acquired a large canvas duffel bag, the kind used by maintenance crews from base surplus. He identified a service tunnel, built during the base's construction in the 1940s and now largely forgotten, that provided access beneath Warehouse 7. The tunnel, originally designed for utility line maintenance, was supposed to be sealed, but Williams had discovered during a routine inspection 2 years earlier that one of the access panels had been improperly secured and could be opened with minimal effort. He studied maps of the surrounding desert, identifying an old mining access road 15 miles southeast of the base that led to a series of abandoned copper mines. The area, desolate and rarely visited, would provide the perfect temporary hiding place. He purchased a used pickup truck through a private sale, paying cash and registering it under a false name using identification he had carefully forged. The truck, a weathered Ford that attracted no attention, was stored at a small lot where seasonal workers parked their vehicles, far enough from his apartment to avoid connecting it to him. On the evening of November 17th, Williams drove the truck to within 2 miles of the base's southeastern perimeter, parking it on Bureau of Land Management property, where weekend recreational vehicles often sat. He hiked back to the base through the desert, carrying nothing that would seem suspicious if he encountered a patrol, and returned to his apartment exhausted but confident. November 18th, 1973, dawned clear and cool across southern Arizona. Williams reported for his Saturday shift at the usual time, 7 in the morning, and performed his duties with the same methodical efficiency he always displayed. He noted with satisfaction that the shipment from Thursday remained secure in Warehouse 7, awaiting its Monday departure. He confirmed with the civilian maintenance supervisor that the scheduled power transition would occur as planned between midnight and 3. As evening approached, Williams completed his shift paperwork and departed the base at 6. Waving casually to the gate guards he had known for years, he drove home, had dinner with Patricia and their 2 children, and watched television until 10. He told his wife he felt restless and was going for a drive, something he did occasionally when he needed to clear his head. She thought nothing of it. Williams drove to a quiet residential area 3 miles from the base and parked his car behind a closed gas station. He changed into dark work clothes he had hidden in the trunk, including boots he had worn at work often enough that his footprints, if discovered, would not seem unusual. He carried a small backpack containing basic tools, work gloves, and a flashlight modified to emit minimal light. He hiked through the desert to the southeastern perimeter of the base, moving slowly and carefully. The night was moonless, which made navigation difficult but provided excellent concealment. He reached the forgotten access tunnel at approximately 11:30 and descended into darkness. The tunnel smelled of dust and decay, its concrete walls covered in decades of accumulated grime. Williams moved through it with confidence born from multiple reconnaissance visits over the past year. The tunnel ran for nearly 200 yards before reaching the access panel beneath Warehouse 7. He waited there, checking his watch repeatedly, forcing himself to remain patient as midnight approached. At 12:15, the facility's power transition began. Williams felt more than heard the subtle change in vibration as the backup generator engaged. He waited an additional 10 minutes, allowing the systems to fully stabilize, then carefully opened the access panel. The panel led to a maintenance crawl space beneath the warehouse floor. Williams squeezed through, pulling his backpack behind him, and navigated to a floor grate that provided access to the main storage area. The grate, supposedly secured with lock bolts, had been gradually loosened by Williams during previous legitimate maintenance visits, a process so gradual that no single inspection would have noticed the deterioration. He lifted the grate slowly, minimizing noise, and pulled himself up into the darkened warehouse. The emergency lighting cast everything in dim red, giving the space an otherworldly quality. Williams could hear his own breathing, unnaturally loud in the silence, and forced himself to move with deliberate calm. The vault stood at the far end of the warehouse, a reinforced steel door set into the concrete wall. Williams approached it with his flashlight off, relying on the emergency lighting. He knew the combination, had known it for months, the result of patient observation as various officers opened the vault in his presence. Military security protocols required regular combination changes, but the officers, overburdened and trusting, often used patterns that made memorization simple for anyone paying attention. Williams worked the combination lock with steady hands. The dial turned smoothly, each number clicking into place with satisfying precision. On his third attempt, the lock disengaged with a heavy metallic thunk that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet warehouse. He opened the vault door and stepped inside. The money sat in sealed canvas bags, stacked on metal shelving and labeled with coded identifiers. Williams scanned the labels with his flashlight, identifying the shipment that had arrived on Thursday. According to the temporary inventory log, which hung on a clipboard inside the vault, the shipment contained $7.3 million, divided among multiple bags. He had brought the large duffel bag, but quickly realized it would be insufficient. Instead, he made a calculation based on weight and volume. Each canvas bag contained approximately $300,000 in mixed bills. If he took 24 bags, roughly $7.2 million, he could manage the weight in multiple trips through the tunnel. But multiple trips increased his risk exponentially. Williams stood in the vault, his mind racing through alternatives, aware that every minute inside increased the danger of discovery. He made a decision that reflected both the boldness and the discipline that had brought him this far. He would take everything in one trip, even if it killed him. Working quickly but carefully, Williams transferred the canvas bags into his duffel and then began loading additional bags directly into a maintenance cart he had positioned near the vault earlier that day, part of his legitimate work duties. The cart, normally used for moving heavy equipment, could hold substantial weight and would allow him to transport everything to the access tunnel in one journey. The loading took 20 minutes. By the time Williams finished, he was sweating despite the cool temperature. The cart, laden with millions in currency, moved reluctantly when he pushed it, its wheels complaining softly against the concrete floor. He maneuvered the cart to the floor grate, then faced his greatest physical challenge. He would need to lower the bags through the grate into the crawl space, then pull them through the tunnel to the external access point. The work would be exhausting and time-consuming, but he had no alternative. Williams began the process systematically. He lowered each bag through the grate, arranging them in the crawl space below, then descended himself. He pulled the bags through the narrow tunnel in batches, moving them 20 feet at a time, then returning for the next batch. The physical exertion was immense, and he felt his muscles burning with fatigue, but he maintained his pace, refusing to rush or panic. By 2:30 in the morning, he had moved all the bags to the external access point. He emerged from the tunnel into the cold desert night, gulping fresh air and allowing himself a moment of rest. The base remained quiet around him, no signs of alarm or unusual activity. Williams made 3 trips from the tunnel to where he had hidden the pickup truck. Each trip, carrying multiple bags across rough terrain in darkness, pushed him to the edge of his endurance. By 4 in the morning, he had loaded everything into the truck bed, covered it with a tarp and construction debris, and was driving slowly away from the base on the deserted mining road. He reached the abandoned copper mine at dawn. The location, scouted months earlier, consisted of several collapsed structures and a series of sealed mine shafts. Williams had identified a particular shaft, partially caved but accessible, where he could hide the money safely. He spent 2 hours transferring the bags deep into the shaft, then carefully concealing the entrance with rocks and brush until it appeared undisturbed. Exhausted and filthy, Williams drove the truck back to the lot where he had found it, wiped it down carefully, and hiked to where he had left his personal car. He drove home, arriving at 7 in the morning. Patricia, accustomed to his restless nighttime drives, barely stirred when he slipped into bed beside her. The theft was discovered at 6:30 Monday morning, when personnel arrived to prepare the shipment for departure. The immediate response was confusion rather than alarm. Officers assumed there had been a scheduling mistake or that the shipment had departed early. It took until late morning for the reality to crystallize. The money was simply gone. The base commander ordered an immediate lockdown, Air Force Office of Special Investigations agents arrived by afternoon. FBI involvement began within 48 hours. The investigation, one of the largest in Air Force history, consumed the base for months. Investigators interrogated every person with access to Warehouse 7. They examined security footage, though the cameras from that era provided grainy, often inconclusive images. They studied duty rosters and time cards. They reviewed maintenance logs and alarm system records. They brought in polygraph experts who tested dozens of personnel. Jerome Williams, whose record was impeccable and whose demeanor remained calm and cooperative, was questioned 3 times. He passed 2 polygraph examinations. Nothing in his behavior or background suggested involvement. He continued his duties throughout the investigation, even assisting agents with their understanding of warehouse procedures. The investigation pursued multiple theories. Some believed the theft was an inside job requiring multiple participants. Others suspected that the money had never arrived on base, that the manifest had been falsified. Still others thought organized crime had somehow breached base security. Each theory produced investigative leads that ultimately collapsed under scrutiny. By mid-1974, the investigation had stalled. By 1975, it was effectively dormant. The Air Force quietly adjusted its security protocols, installed upgraded alarm systems, and implemented stricter documentation procedures. The case remained officially open, but practically forgotten. Jerome Williams did not touch the money for 5 years. He understood that any sudden improvement in his financial situation would invite scrutiny. Instead, he continued living exactly as he had before, working the same job, maintaining the same modest lifestyle, giving investigators no reason to look at him twice. He and Patricia continued to struggle with bills, even as $7 million sat buried in the desert. In 1978, Williams finally made his move. He had been preparing for years, establishing the foundation for a plausible explanation for moderate prosperity. He claimed to have won $15,000 in a Las Vegas casino, a story supported by documents he had carefully forged. This windfall allowed him to pay off debts and begin a small home improvement business on the side. The business, Williams Restoration Services, provided the perfect vehicle for slowly laundering the stolen money. He began with small residential jobs, actually performing the work himself, building a legitimate operation that gradually grew. He hired employees, acquired proper licensing, established business accounts. The company earned real money through real work, but Williams also began carefully mixing in cash from the buried fortune, reporting it as business income and paying taxes on it. The process was glacially slow and incredibly disciplined. Williams allowed himself to access no more than $50,000 per year from the hidden money, an amount that could be plausibly explained by a growing business. He kept meticulous false records, creating fictional clients and fabricated invoices that would withstand casual scrutiny. In 1979, the Williams family moved into a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood. In 1982, Williams left the Air Force with an honorable discharge and devoted himself full-time to his business. By 1985, he had become a respected member of the Tucson business community, known for fair dealing and quality work. He maintained this careful discipline for 3 decades. He never made flashy purchases or drew attention to himself. He drove reliable but unremarkable cars, took modest vacations, lived comfortably but not extravagantly. His children attended public schools, though he ensured they had opportunities he had never enjoyed. His business grew genuinely successful, to the point where the laundered money became almost unnecessary. But Williams continued to access the buried fortune periodically, always carefully, always within the bounds of what his business could plausibly earn. By 2000, he had laundered approximately $4 million, paying taxes on every dollar and creating a completely legitimate paper trail. The psychological burden, however, weighed on him increasingly as he aged. He rarely slept through the night. He developed hypertension and stomach ulcers. He became hyper-vigilant about security, about maintaining his cover, about ensuring that no detail could unravel the life he had built. The fear of discovery never left him, even as the years made detection seem increasingly unlikely. There were close calls. In 1987, a journalist researching cold cases contacted him for an interview about his time at Davis-Monthan. Williams politely declined, claiming he remembered little from that period. In 1993, during a routine audit of his business, an IRS agent questioned the source of several large cash deposits. Williams provided documentation of construction jobs paid in cash by fictional clients, and the agent, satisfied with the paper trail, moved on. In 2003, Williams had a minor heart attack. Lying in the hospital, facing his mortality, he nearly confessed to Patricia, but fear and habit kept him silent. He recovered and returned to his careful routine, but the incident heightened his awareness that his secret would need to be managed even after his death. Williams began considering how to handle the remaining money, approximately $3 million still buried in the desert. He wanted his children to benefit from it somehow, but direct inheritance would invite impossible questions. He considered anonymous donations to charities, but worried about triggering investigations. In the end, he did nothing, paralyzed by the same caution that had protected him for decades. The resolution, when it came, arrived from an entirely unexpected direction. In 2008, Williams's nephew, Darnell Richardson, applied for a top-secret security clearance as part of his promotion to Master Sergeant at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. The process, standard for his position, included extensive background checks and interviews with family members. During a routine interview, Richardson mentioned his uncle Jerome, who had served at Davis-Monthan in the early 1970s. The investigator, a thorough professional, made a note to verify Williams' service record as part of the background check. When he pulled the file, he noticed that Williams had been interviewed during the 1973 theft investigation. This detail alone meant nothing. Hundreds of personnel had been interviewed, but the investigator, following protocol, included it in his report. The report crossed the desk of an Air Force OSI analyst who specialized in cold cases. The analyst, reviewing the Davis-Monthan theft file as part of a broader study of unsolved military crimes, noticed Williams's name among the interviewed personnel and separately noted his subsequent departure from the Air Force and establishment of a business. Still, this proved nothing. Thousands of service members leave the military and start businesses, but the analyst, curious, requested Williams's tax records. What he found raised questions. Williams Restoration Services had reported steady income growth over 30 years, always reasonable, always properly documented. But when the analyst compared the reported income to industry standards and local economic conditions, he noticed something subtle. The business consistently outperformed comparable operations by approximately 10 to 15%, year after year with unusual consistency. This anomaly, combined with Williams' connection to the Davis-Monthan case, prompted a deeper investigation. In March 2008, FBI agents began discreetly examining Williams's business records, interviewing clients, and tracking down old invoices. They discovered that approximately 20% of Williams's reported clients over the years could not be verified. The addresses existed, but the people did not. The invoices appeared legitimate, but the jobs had never been performed. In June 2008, agents obtained a warrant to interview Williams. They arrived at his home on a Wednesday morning, identifying themselves and requesting his cooperation. Williams, now 63 years old and facing the moment he had dreaded for 35 years, made a decision that surprised the agents. He confessed immediately. Sitting in his living room, with Patricia listening in shock beside him, Williams described everything. He explained his planning, his execution, his decades of careful money laundering. He showed them his records, the false invoices, the documentation of his systematic theft. He even offered to lead them to the remaining money, still buried in the desert mine shaft where he had hidden it in 1973. The following day, Williams accompanied agents to the abandoned copper mine. The location had changed over 35 years, the desert reclaiming the area, but Williams navigated to the correct spot without hesitation. Agents spent 2 days excavating the mine shaft, eventually recovering approximately $3.1 million in badly deteriorated currency. The bills, exposed to moisture and desert temperature extremes, had degraded significantly. Many were stuck together in solid blocks. Others had been damaged by insects and rodents. But the Treasury Department confirmed that the serial numbers matched currency reported stolen from Davis-Monthan in 1973. Jerome Williams was charged with theft of government property, fraud, and money laundering. He pleaded guilty to all charges in December 2008. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors acknowledged his cooperation and the fact that he had voluntarily led them to the remaining money. They also noted that he had paid taxes on the money he had laundered. an ironic detail that suggested some twisted sense of civic responsibility even while committing fraud. Williams's attorney argued that his client had been driven by desperation, that he had lived with enormous guilt, and that his cooperation demonstrated genuine remorse. Character witnesses described a man who had been a good employer, a devoted father, and a respected community member. The judge, acknowledging these factors but emphasizing the seriousness of the crimes, sentenced Williams to 12 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to forfeit all assets traceable to the stolen money, though the decades of commingling made this calculation extremely complex. The government eventually settled on a figure of approximately $2.7 million in restitution. Patricia Williams, who prosecutors determined had no knowledge of her husband's crimes, was not charged. She divorced Jerome in 2009, unable to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the criminal he had been. Their children, both adults with families of their own, struggled to process their father's double life. Jerome Williams served 7 years of his sentence before being released in 2015 for good behavior. He now lives in a small apartment in Phoenix, working part-time at a hardware store. He rarely gives interviews, but in a brief conversation with an investigative journalist in 2017, he reflected on his crimes with what seemed like genuine regret. He acknowledged that the money had ultimately brought him nothing but anxiety and fear. The life he built on it, while comfortable, was poisoned by the constant terror of discovery. He expressed remorse for betraying the trust placed in him by the Air Force and for the years of deception he inflicted on his family. The Davis-Monthan theft led to significant changes in military security protocols. The Air Force implemented comprehensive reforms in how high-value shipments are tracked, stored, and monitored. The antiquated alarm systems of the 1960s and 70s were replaced with modern technology, featuring redundant systems and continuous monitoring. Personnel access to sensitive materials became subject to more rigorous oversight and regular audits. Perhaps most significantly, the military services began taking seriously the financial stress of junior personnel, recognizing that economic desperation can create security risks. Programs were established to provide financial counseling, emergency assistance, and support for service members facing hardship. The case also highlighted the remarkable discipline required to successfully hide such a crime for so long. Williams's success came not from sophisticated criminal techniques, but from patience, caution, and the willingness to delay gratification for years. His eventual capture resulted not from investigative brilliance, but from chance, the random intersection of a nephew's career advancement and an analyst's curiosity. In the end, Jerome Williams stole $7.3 million and spent 35 years looking over his shoulder. He laundered approximately $4 million, paying taxes on it and building a legitimate business that provided cover for his crimes. He raised a family, earned respect in his community, and lived what appeared to be an exemplary life. But he never escaped what he had done that November night in 1973. The money, which he had stolen out of desperation to provide a better life for his children, ultimately cost him his freedom, his marriage, and his reputation. The irony was not lost on Williams himself, who acknowledged in that 2017 interview that he would have been far better off accepting the modest struggles of an honest life. The abandoned copper mine, where millions in currency slowly deteriorated over 3 decades, has been permanently sealed by federal authorities. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base continues its operations, its warehouses now protected by security systems that would make Williams's 1973 theft impossible. And somewhere in government archives, the case file on the Phantom heist remains, a reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes carry seeds of their own eventual discovery. Williams's story raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of crime and punishment that continue to resonate with criminologists and ethicists. Here was a man who committed a massive theft, yet lived an otherwise law-abiding life for decades. He employed people, paid his taxes on laundered money, contributed to his community, and raised children who became productive citizens. Does the good he did while living on stolen money offset the crime? Most would say no, but the question lingers. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations conducted an internal review after Williams's arrest, examining why the 1973 investigation failed to identify him as a suspect. The conclusion was sobering. Williams had been the perfect criminal for his circumstances. He had no prior record, no suspicious associations, no lifestyle inconsistencies. He passed polygraphs because he genuinely believed in his own justifications. He left no physical evidence because he knew the facility intimately. The investigation had actually worked correctly. Williams had simply planned better than the protocols anticipated. Former investigators who worked the original case expressed frustration, but also grudging respect for Williams's discipline. Special Agent Thomas Brennan, who interviewed Williams in 1974, told reporters in 2008 that he remembered nothing particularly notable about the interview. Williams had been cooperative, knowledgeable about procedures, and seemingly genuine in his concern about the theft's impact on base security. The $3 million recovered from the mineshaft presented its own complications. The Treasury Department spent months analyzing the deteriorated currency, attempting to restore what could be saved. Ultimately, only about $800,000 could be restored to usable condition. The rest was too damaged. The bills fused into unrecognizable masses by decades of exposure. Patricia Williams, in a rare interview given in 2010, described the devastation of learning her entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies. She had believed they struggled together through hard times, that Jerome's business success came from honest work and determination. Learning the truth shattered not just her present, but her past. Every memory, every accomplishment, every moment of pride in their life together became tainted by the knowledge of where the money had really come from. She spoke of feeling like she had been married to a stranger, that the man she loved had never truly existed. Their son, Michael Williams, a software engineer in Seattle, struggled with similar questions about identity and legacy. In a 2016 blog post that gained attention, he wrote about growing up believing his father was a self-made success story, only to learn he was the beneficiary of a massive crime. Michael donated a substantial portion of his inheritance to military charities, attempting to make symbolic restitution for benefits he unknowingly received from stolen money. The case inspired changes beyond just military security. Business licensing boards began implementing more rigorous verification procedures for companies reporting cash-heavy revenue. The IRS developed better algorithms for detecting laundering patterns that mimic legitimate business growth. Law enforcement agencies studying the case created training programs about long-term financial crimes that focus on patience and discipline rather than sophistication. Jerome Williams remains a paradox. A man who betrayed his country's trust, yet never cheated his customers. A criminal who stole millions, yet filed honest tax returns on his illegal income. A father who wanted better for his children, yet left them with a legacy of shame and moral confusion. In his Phoenix apartment, surrounded by books and memories of a life that can never be reclaimed, Williams sometimes receives letters from criminology students and true crime enthusiasts wanting to understand his mindset. He rarely responds, but those who have spoken with him describe a man haunted not by regret over the theft itself, but by the realization that the life he built on it was never really his. He had spent 35 years as a successful businessman and respected citizen, but it was all performance, all pretense. The money that was supposed to provide freedom had instead created an elaborate prison from which he could never escape. And in the end, that may have been the harshest punishment of all.